Hi there, welcome back to IndyCar after a bit of a break. I'm sorry about that, but I'm back again on, 27th of November today. Sorry I wasn't around the last few days. Unfortunately, I had a big dental operation and some complications set in, left me with 5 days of extreme pain. But having said that, 5 days of extreme pain that was alleviated by the Scottish NHS, which, let's face it, we couldn't really live without, and certainly I wouldn't be back here working again and able to talk to you without the NHS being there. So I want to say a big thank you to my own dentist first of all for being there to do some emergency treatment when I was suffering extreme pain, and also to the dental hospital yesterday who also did something similar. So I am now back, pain under control hopefully, and able to talk to you. So the NHS in Scotland, valuable. Let's make sure we keep it, because even me, without any entitlement to free dental treatment, I was only charged £15 for the treatment I got at the dental hospital yesterday through NHS Scotland, and that was with me phoning NHS 24 yesterday because I was so desperate to get something done about the pain. However, here I am, and I thought I would talk about a couple of things which I reported on last week. The first one is the Scottish spaceports. Now, at the moment, there is one Scottish spaceport called Spaceport, which is on the island of Unst, if I remember correctly, in Shetland. And there's also another active spaceport, the one at the moment, which is actually the only spaceport in the entire UK which has a licence to launch, and that is in Cornwall. And the Cornish spaceport has had some different treatment, I think you could safely say, compared to the Scottish one. Now, interestingly, it took me a long time to find any accurate information about the state of Britain's so-called space programme. There had been rumours circulating on social media for weeks that the British spaceports were in severe financial trouble. You may remember me reporting previously that Sir Richard Branson's launcher company, Virgin Orbital, I think they were called, were operating, or originally operating from the spaceport in Cornwall, using a retired jumbo jet from Virgin Atlantic's existing fleet to carry aloft a launcher under its wing, which would then be dropped, fired, and would carry on into orbit, taking satellites with it. Now, sadly, that didn't work. Unfortunately, although the first stage of that launcher worked perfectly, the second stage malfunctioned, and unfortunately, the 3 satellites which it was carrying ended up in the Atlantic. Also, on the back of that, I reported last week that Virgin Orbital had filed for bankruptcy protection. So they have actually gone bankrupt, and Virgin Orbital is no more. And since it was at the time the only active customer of the British spaceport in Cornwall, the only one, incidentally, with a British launch licence, a licence to actually launch anything at all, you would have thought perhaps that that particular spaceport would be in trouble, but you would be wrong. On the other hand, the Spaceport spaceport in Shetland, which is a completely different arrangement, I think it's probably good for me to explain what the differences are. The spaceport in Cornwall is designed for what's known as horizontal launching. That means aircraft taking off from a runway, either flying into orbit directly and then coming back down and landing there, or aircraft taking off and launching rockets from under their wings, which is what Virgin Orbital was trying to do, and then bringing their jumbo jet back to the spaceport. On the other hand, the Spaceport launch site is what's known as a vertical launch site, a traditional rocket launch pad in which rockets will take off vertically, fly out northwards over the northern Atlantic, over towards the North Pole, and actually deposit satellites into polar orbits, high inclination orbits, which are used for studying things like ice flows and weather, and also spy satellites for looking down on your enemies. But what's the difference between the two ports? How are they both faring? Well, I had to dig very deep and actually found some accurate information from an American channel called The Angry Astronaut, which is a channel on YouTube which I watch now and again. And the presenter and writer of Angry Astronaut had been in the UK for Virgin Orbital's launch attempt, which obviously had failed. and he had heard the rumours and decided to dig a little deeper to find out what had been going on. Now, the intricacies of the UK space programme are strange, to say the very least. The United Kingdom has an agreement with Lockheed Martin, which is an American aerospace and defence company. Lockheed Martin has a contract to launch a space plane which has been developed in America by a private venture company, and it's known as the Dream Chaser, and it is a little bit like a space shuttle which can carry up to 10 astronauts plus cargo into orbit and then fly back and glide back down and land on the runway. And this is exactly what the Spaceport in Cornwall is designed to do. It's designed to allow this American company to fly payloads on any rocket from any part of the Earth. For example, the European Space Agency, ESA, could launch satellites on their Ariane rocket. And these satellites, if they launch on top of this Dream Chaser reusable space plane, could actually bring satellites or other experiments back down to Earth and land them on the runway at this spaceport in Cornwall. So they have that agreement in place, and they have customers. But not only that, but the spaceport in Cornwall has a massively developed infrastructure, including integration buildings where satellites can be stored. It's got clean rooms. It's got all sorts of facilities which allow them to assemble the launch vehicles on site to be taken aloft to be fired into orbit. Contrast that with Saxiford, which the building of which was financed largely by a local company based on Shetland, which has built the first the road in. It's also built a launch pad and test stand, but it has run out of money. It still needs to build a large building, an assembly building and an integration building similar to that which exists in the English spaceport. But unfortunately, Saxiford does not seem to have or enjoy the same level of funding which the English spaceport has, nor does it have any launch licenses. And you might remember me telling you last week that the only launchers mentioned anywhere in the British media which were supposed to launch from Saxiford were primarily European, and the main customer was a German company and a Canadian company, both of which are having problems of their own. And that's knocked on into the launch site, and Saxiford was these are the customers that they were depending on. However, Angry Astronaut also mentioned something which the BBC completely failed to mention, which was that Skyrora, an Edinburgh rocket development company, is almost ready to launch. And this is something which I didn't find on any British media at all, any TV stations, anything at all. In fact, the Angry Astronaut, who's quite famous for obviously being angry about things, was angry particularly about a report by the Daily Record, which said that they had managed to gain access to the Saxiford launch complex by driving out along the new road to discover some decaying World War II buildings, and saying that if this was a British space programme, then they really needed to get their act together. He was particularly angered by this because Saxiford is not having problems because of its management or its business model, both of which, according to this American reporter, are in fine fettle. The only problem is with the launcher companies themselves, who would be paying for the services, and that appears to have left Saxiford's board of management unable to pay the construction company to continue to finish development of the site. So what we're seeing here is the Scottish launch site being starved of funding by the British space programme. The British space programme, having failed in its first launch and having its major, I suppose its major customer, Virgin Orbital, go out of business on the first attempt, is still in a strangely healthy situation because it has the facilities for all of its other customers, even though there aren't any launches yet scheduled for anything to happen there. So I think what we're seeing here is a tale of two countries. Scotland, being at the other end of the UK, is not getting the same amount of funding, and certainly is getting some very bad reportage, especially from a daily tabloid like the Daily Record, which should really be helping to big up such places as Saxiford, criticising them for the problems they're having with funding. Now, I have to say, looking at this on balance, it seems to me, as usual, that all the money coming from this American deal that the United Kingdom has done with Lockheed Martin is being funneled into Cornwall and not into Saxiford, which is something I spoke about several programmes ago, about what on earth this deal was all about. Now we know what it's about. It's about Lockheed Martin being able to land this space plane somewhere near to Europe so that European customers, satellite companies or scientific companies, can get their payloads back more easily. So the British space programme isn't actually British. What we've got is a runway in Cornwall with an awful lot of new infrastructure and support buildings around it designed to serve the other countries' space industries, not the United Kingdom's. And it's Saxiford, which is really ideally placed to launch satellites over the pole, is being starved of the funds it needs to continue its construction and to finish that construction so that its customers can actually launch there, because one of them is unable to launch at Saxiford because the facility's not finished, and they have gone to Australia instead, all because the British government will not fund Saxiford or help them out in any way. So it's not good news. However, moving away from the space industry and back to something a little bit more contentious, the Scottish oil industry is set for a huge blow in 2025 when the only refinery left in Scotland in Grangemouth is set to close, causing hundreds of job losses and the end of oil refining in Scotland, the country which actually produces all of the UK's, or at least most of the UK's oil. So we're now going to be in a position after 2025, and motorists and transport companies and truckers and all the rest of it, bus companies, are going to have to buy their refined fuels back from England at massively inflated prices in order to keep our vehicles on the road. And this is the country which actually has all the oil, and now it's being diverted south to create jobs in England so that they can sell it back to the poor old Scots whose oil it was in the first place at massively increased prices. Where have we heard this before? Well, we've heard it before in the energy industry, which has been treated in exactly the same way by the British state. So we're living in a nation which has been now, I think the noose has been tightened, as I said last week, around the Scottish economy. We're going to be suffering job losses. We're going to have to buy back our own refined oil products from England in order to run our own transport industry here. And we're going to have to buy back our own renewable energy from England, or from their grid system, which isn't really a national grid, it's an English grid, at higher than normal prices. If we were independent right now, all of the oil flowing into Scotland's territory from Scotland's territory would be ours, and we would be able to refine it and produce it at a price which is far lower than down south, because we don't need to sell it directly into the oil market. It could simply be funneled into the local national economy of Scotland and reduce energy prices for everyone. Same goes for a renewable energy. If we were independent, we could get our energy at cost, which is what we used to do in the good old days when we had what was known as Scottish, what was it called in those days? The South of Scotland Electricity Board and the Hydro Board were the only two suppliers of energy in Scotland, and they were both nationalised and they were both controlled by government, and we didn't see these gigantic energy spiralling costs due to global inflation. The United Kingdom's experiment with international free marketeering has led Scotland down the road to poverty and has allowed the British government to effectively annex all of Scotland's energy reserves and funnel them into England, denuding us of jobs and opportunities for our own young people. Where have you heard this story before? Well, it's exactly the same story as it happened in the 1980s under Margaret Thatcher, when she sold off all Scotland's heavy industries to the global market, closed everything down, basically concreted over the tops of all the coal mines, prevented any shipbuilding and car manufacturing and any other kind of heavy metal bending industries from happening here, and all the jobs fled to the south of England. We're back in the same boat again, and there's no way out of it unless we become independent, which brings me back to the original point of this programme, why we need independence. We need independence so that we don't become even poorer than we are now, which is our fate if we stick with the United Kingdom. So I guess my message for us all today is that this is a tale of two nations. One nation which gets to hog everything that belongs to the other, and the poorer neighbour, that's us, gets nothing. In fact, not only do we get nothing, but we have to pay to get back what we already owned, and we have to pay vastly inflated market prices as our energy passes through the hands of umpteen middlemen in the global market before it comes back to us. And that's what's wrong with our entire energy infrastructure from day one of being in the Union. I guess, it's hard to feel optimistic when you see this happening around you, but I think if nothing else, this lights a fire under me to keep on doing what I'm doing and producing more of these programmes. You'll notice I haven't really doled out any blame for this upon our own government, largely because our own government is effectively, I suppose, the British government in tartan up here. We are a devolved administration. We have zero powers, and what little powers we did have now been removed from us by our lords and masters further south. So unless we want more of this to happen, then we need to pressure our own politicians to stop mucking about and to stop allowing things to go wrong and allowing the British state to take more and more powers off our own parliament and actually stand up for ourselves. And that means we need to win our independence. We need to do it with a vote share, not a seat share. And if Hamza Yusuf happens to be watching me today, please, Mr. Yusuf, pay some attention here. We don't need to win the next general election on a seat count. That would prove absolutely nothing to England, and they would not accept it. We need a vote count. That means the number of votes cast for pro-independence countries, if they exceed 50%, in other words, 50% of the electorate plus one vote, then we leave. Simple as that. There would be no need for a referendum because the vote numbers would prove the majority. And that, I believe, is the stance that Alba has now taken. They have now said no more referendums. Referendums have been compromised by the United Kingdom government and they won't give us any more anyway. So it might be that the only way left to us is through general elections of one kind or another. So if it's not the general election next year in 2024 for the UK, it will be the Scottish general election in 2026 for Holyrood. And in that, if we get a majority of the votes, we should walk, because nothing else is going to get us our independence. Anyway, that's it from me today. I am not suffering any huge pain at the moment, other than the pain in the ass which exists further south. So if you, like me, believe that Scotland really needs to take back control over its resources, you've only one place to go, and that's to your own MPs and MSPs who are supposedly pro-independence, and ask them to start putting pressure on the leadership to do something about this before we lose everything. That's it from IndyCar today. I'll see you again, I hope, in the next few days. But thanks for following me to the end. And also a big thank you to all of my loyal friends and supporters who've continued to donate to IndyCar in the last few days I've been absent. Thank you very much. It really makes this an awful lot easier for me to do, as I'm now having to rebuild my entire working diary from scratch after having to cancel a lot of lessons due to my health problems over the last 5 days. And also a big thank you to Scotland's NHS for making sure that my absence from the work environment was so short. That's it from IndyCar. Keep the faith, and I'll see you all later in the week. Bye for now.